A strange experience I had in 2006. In 2006, I was just 16 years old and had recently moved to a new city. We were settling into a new house, and after starting my job at McDonald's, I had to go to bed early to wake up for work in the morning. One night, I had a bizarre dream. I was running through the streets of the city I now lived in, but I wasn't just running for the sake of it. I was fleeing from something terrifying. As I ran, I suddenly saw a strange figure in front of me. He was wearing a long black coat and a big hat that obscured his face. The only thing I could see were his large eyes, which held an eerie expression, as if they were pleading for something from me. We locked eyes for a moment, and then he gestured for me to come with him. But just then, I woke up from my dream, my heart racing. It took me a moment to realize it was just a dream. I got out of bed and watched my breath mist in the cold air around me, astonished by how chilly it was despite having closed my bedroom window. I walked over to the window to check, and it was indeed shut tight, but I could still feel warm air sneaking into the room. I returned to my bed, still thinking about that cold atmosphere, when all of a sudden I saw someone standing in the corner. As I focused more closely, I realized it was the same figure from my dream. A wave of fear washed over me, and I jumped up, watching as he approached. I asked him, "What do you want from me?" But he moved closer and pointed at me with his finger. I was sure I wasn't mistaken. I could see him clearly, and my gut told me he was a demon. Gathering my courage, I shouted, "Get out!" But he signaled that he wouldn't leave. Suddenly, he screamed in a deafening voice, "I'll never leave! I'll always be here!" And just like that, he vanished. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and my heart raced. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake off the incident, and weeks went by without seeing him again. Then, one Christmas night, my parents were out, leaving me alone with my younger siblings. I needed to sleep early to wake up the next morning. I laid my head on the pillow and started to close my eyes, but my siblings began singing Christmas carols. I was so tired and thought they'd eventually stop, but they just kept going. Suddenly, I felt the same sensation I'd experienced the day I saw the demon, and my siblings' singing stopped abruptly. I threw the covers off, but found no one there. Suddenly, that figure appeared again right in front of me. When he moved, fear gripped me, and I blacked out. When I came to, I stumbled out of my room to find my siblings had locked themselves in the bathroom. When I knocked on the door, they told me to leave them alone. I asked what happened, and they told me our dad was on his way home. But to my shock, I noticed my hand was bleeding. When I looked closer, I saw a large gash, and the bathroom door was pockmarked with holes from a broom handle due to the force of a blow. I went to where we had been sitting and found knives embedded in the wall. I had no idea who had done that. I felt an overwhelming shock, and the same feeling of nausea returned. Just then, my dad came home. When he walked in, he hit me and told me to go to my room and not come out. I covered myself under the blankets, not crying from what had happened, but out of fear and terror. I couldn't understand what had happened to my siblings. When I asked them, they said they had been singing next to me. I felt anxious and ran after them, feeling like a completely different person, not realizing what was going on. That was the last time I saw that demon. After that, we moved to a new apartment. One day, I took a shower and went to bed after a long day. But suddenly, I felt that same coldness again. When I lifted my head, I saw the demon in front of me once more, towering and terrifying. I gazed into his eyes, which glowed like embers, and heard his voice say, "I'll never leave. I'll always be here." And I knew then that he would remain with me for the rest of my life. A strange encounter in college. Let me take you back to a day that feels like it was just yesterday, but it was actually a while ago. I was hanging out with my buddy after our classes wrapped up. We were making our way back to the college dorm where we lived. It's one of those old buildings with several rooms, but we shared an apartment together. So there we were, just two guys enjoying the last bits of sunlight before evening set in. As we walked, something caught my eye, an unusual hat lying on the ground. It looked like a wizard's hat straight out of a movie. We laughed about it, tossing around silly questions like, Who left this thing behind? Did they think it had magical powers and just tossed it away when it didn't work anymore? It didn't look worn out at all, so we thought, why not take it with us? After all, it could be a cool conversation starter, right? Once we got back to our place, I changed my clothes and settled down with a book, placing the hat in the corner of the room beside my book before I drifted off to sleep. But suddenly, I jolted awake to the sound of something rustling in the corner where I had left the hat. At first, I looked around and saw nothing, but as I blinked away the sleepiness, I noticed something bizarre. Something was crawling out from under the hat. I couldn't believe my eyes. 2 hands emerged, and then a massive figure began to take shape. Before I knew it, a towering person stood before me, their head practically brushing the ceiling. I felt like my heart was about to explode from fear. This figure was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its skin had this unnatural hue, almost as if it were lifeless. I was frozen in sheer terror. Then it took a step closer and reached out its hand toward me. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed with fear. Just then, my friend barged into the room, eyes wide open, and asked, "What's wrong? What's happening?" I quickly told him about the creature, but when he looked around, there was nothing there. Just the hat lying innocently in the corner. He chuckled. "Looks like you had a nightmare. Don't think about it too much. Just go back to sleep." He laughed as if it was no big deal and plopped down next to me. But I couldn't shake off the image of that giant figure. I felt like I was on the verge of losing my mind. My friend then mentioned that his grandfather loved to hear stories and jokingly said he would wear the hat on his head to keep me from being scared. The next morning, I woke up to my friend still fast asleep. It was strange. Usually, he was the first one up, but here he was, snoozing away. I leaned over and said, "Hey, why are you still under the hat? We're going to be late for school." No response. I nudged him, but he was in a deep slumber. I felt something was off. His breathing was too loud, too heavy. So, I made the bold decision to lift the hat off him. And when I did, I saw the last thing I ever expected to see. My friend had transformed into that enormous creature. His face was grotesque, completely lipless, and his eyes were pure white. I was paralyzed with horror and bolted to the far corner of the room. I spotted a coat on the floor, quickly threw it on, and dashed out into the hallway. I rushed out of the building, heart racing, and when I turned around, they were gone. My friend, that terrifying figure, everything. I ran to find help and told everyone my buddy was missing. From that day on, sleep eluded me, and I couldn't shake off the chilling memory of that night. Title: A Voice from the Darkness. Hey guys, gather round. Let me tell you a chilling story that happened to me not too long ago. I'm 27 years old, living alone in my house, which is just a stone's throw from my parents' place. You two know, my mom has always been a bit of a scaredy cat, but the real kicker is how she just barges into my house without a heads up. It's like she doesn't even care about the awkwardness it causes. Talk about annoying. I love hosting my friends, but it's tough when my mom is always around. You'd think I'd just tell her to knock it off, but let me tell you, my mom is super sweet, and she forgets things easily. It's complicated. One night I was out with my friends having a blast. We laughed, we joked, and by the time the clock struck 2, I was wiped out. I said my goodbyes and started my trek home, but as I walked, I felt dizzy. When I finally reached my door, I realized it was wide open. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me, and set my keys on the table. That's when I spotted a note from my mom. I thought, why didn't she tell me she was here? I opened it up, and she had left me a little something, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I figured she must have hit the hay upstairs, like she often does when she's tired. But then I heard a noise coming from the second floor, and my heart sank. I reassured myself, I'm 27, I don't need to wait for my mom, but there was no response. My heart raced, and I decided to go check on her. I searched everywhere in the house, but found no sign of her. Panic set in. What if she had left without telling me? I bolted for my phone, ready to call her, but fear gripped me. So I called one of my buddies and explained the situation. He replied in a weird tone, "Dude, your mom's been sleeping at our place for a while now." I was floored. If she wasn't here, then who the heck was making that noise? Suddenly, I spotted a figure lurking in the shadows. Its face was like a skull, and its eyes were huge and vacant. I couldn't take it anymore. I sprinted out of the house. I rushed to my dad and told him what happened. He immediately decided to call the cops. Within 15 minutes, the police arrived and began to search the place. After a while, one of the officers came out and said, "We didn't find anything. We'll keep an eye on it if anything pops up." But deep down, I knew that figure wasn't normal. Its features were unsettling and terrifying. From that day forward, my dad decided to stop my mom from visiting my house. Every time she came over, she'd end up more exhausted. It was a tough call because she just wanted to spend time with me. But at the same time, there was a strange comfort in it. Even with all that, I still can't sleep well. I always feel like that thing I saw is still lurking around in my house. I can't shake off that terrifying moment. It haunts me to this day. So, if you ever hear a noise in the dark, trust me, don't just brush it off. You never know what might be watching you from the shadows. The story of Ihab. Once upon a time, there was a man named Ihab. You could see the exhaustion written all over him. His eyes looked drained, and he was noticeably pale. The reason for this? He hadn't slept in 5 whole days. Driven by desperation, he decided to seek help from a psychiatrist. When he arrived, the doctor welcomed him in and asked about his sleepless nights. Ihab replied, gasping for breath, "I can't seem to fall asleep without seeing something terrifying." The doctor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What exactly do you see?" he asked. Ihab's voice trembled as he responded, "I see a dark creature with 3 eyes, a crimson face, and razor-sharp teeth. It's absolutely horrifying." "That's just your imagination," the doctor reassured him. "This will be easy to fix. I'll prescribe some medication to help you get over this." Ihab took the pills, but each time he tried to sleep, that terrifying creature would still haunt him. The treatment was futile. When Ihab returned to the doctor, he looked even worse. His eyes were bloodshot, and he appeared pale and utterly drained. As he sat in the office, he began describing the bizarre behaviors of this creature, but the doctor continued to assure him it was all in his head. As time passed, Ihab not only began hearing the creature's voice, but also found himself unable to see it anymore. His condition was spiraling out of control. One day, while walking down the street, he stumbled upon a broken cell phone lying on the ground. Though he was hesitant to pick it up, he figured it might be a good idea to return it to its owner. He took the phone home, but when he tried to charge it, it wouldn't power on. Thinking he could find the owner through the contacts, he browsed through the phone but only found one unregistered number. Deciding to call it, he received no answer. Instead, he sent a text to the mysterious number, letting them know he found their phone. After a while, he received a strange response. "Where are you?" The name on the message was his own. At first, Ihab thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone had the same name. He sent another message, explaining that he'd found the phone and wanted to return it. The reply came swiftly, "I'll be there in an hour." But just as Ihab finished texting, he heard a loud knock on his apartment door. Heart racing, he cautiously peered through the peephole, only to see nothing. A chill ran down his spine, and he quickly stepped back from the door. He clutched the phone tightly in his hand, deciding he would call the police if this continued. As he typed another message to the unknown number, threatening to involve the authorities, he received a quick reply, "Open the door now." Panic surged through Ihab. He set the phone down and felt an eerie sensation creeping into his chest. He dashed to the door, locking it tight. He resolved to call the police, but when his phone rang again, he was startled to find that the voice came from behind him. In that moment, Ihab realized the horrific truth. The creature that had tormented him for days wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It had become a terrifying reality, lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce.